And we're back. As promised, we're gonna finally get around to unwrapping the head of this particular character. I'm gonna go ahead and hide that body real quick, so we'll just work with the head. Hide that selection. One thing I do need to point out, if you're paying super close attention, I did do some modifications to the head of this particular character. I gave him some more geometry around the nose, and I made the eyes bigger. Since I had done that, after I had done my skinning, I had to go and unskin. So you can see I'm on rigging here. I'm just going to tell you what happened. So I did the unbind skin, and then I had to rebind the skin. And again, I just used the single selected joint. So I just bound this to the head node, so it kind of just moves around like an action figure head. And then I also used the Geodesic Voxel, which again kind of goes from that bone node out and fills in the model almost like Minecraft blocks, if you want to imagine it that way. So that's what the voxels are. They're completely 3D pixels, and so they're little cubes. This resolution here, 256. Of course, if we go all the way up to 1024, that's just the resolution of the tiny little blocks that it fills in the mesh with Minecraft style. So since I had made modifications to this head, I did have to go ahead and rebind. So that's something to keep in mind. If you find yourself like me and you just can't leave well enough alone, you need to go change something on the model that doesn't quite sit right with you. That's something you'll have to do. All right, so I'm going to go back to my modeling. I've just got the head selected here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit UV. And I'm going to open up my UV editor. And as you can see, this particular head, we started with just a sphere. And so this particular unwrapping with the little sawtooth here, that's a standard UV for a sphere. So it looks like we've already got some stuff in place, but you can see there's going to be a lot of craziness trying if we wanted to paint the sides of the nose or around the brims of the hat. So we're going to go ahead and do a fully manual unwrap here. And so I'm going to go to trying to remember where I saw that show. I'll go to the UV. I'm just going to select by the shell. Okay, here we go. So right-clicked on the mesh itself, UV and UV shell, and as you can see, if I select, I've just got one big shell here, right? And that kind of goes with what we're seeing here. This sawtooth unwrap of a sphere, it's one big shell. So we're going to do some crazy stuff here. I'm going to go back into edge mode on this, and since I know when I put my hardened lines around to kind of define some edges, um, that really says that I know where some defined spots are on this model. So I'm going to grab those, right? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off his hat. Select that. See if that selects the whole thing. And as we do some selections, you can see it's selecting on the UV panel as well. And it looks like we've selected all the way around the hat. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and Command Z and undo. I'm not seeing the tools I'm expecting to see, so I'll just use this one. So I'll use the I've got a cut UV tool. I just want to cut. Will that work? Okay, I'm going to go back into UV shell. This is still just a shell. So I don't really want the tool. I just wanted to cut by what I had selected. I'll go back to edge mode. Do this again. Oh, that's right. Okay, so there is some weirdness in the UV editor itself. If I just right click, I get one set of tools, um, and if I hold Shift and I right click, just over here, I'll get another one. So with Shift and right click, and with my edge loop selected, I'm just going to go ahead and say Cut UVs, and that should have just done exactly what we wanted. And to check that out, we're going to go back into here. In our main panel, UV shell. As you can see, if I start selecting, that hat is its own shell, and now the rest of the head and face is another. So we did successfully cut the hat. So I'm back on the UV editor window here, and I held down Shift and right click, and I'm going to say toggle shell borders. And this shows me where the borders are at. And I think I've got a display for that as well here in this view, but I'm not seeing it. Select the entire UV. All right, well, we'll find it later, I'm sure. Hover around. Well, it's very helpful, but it's not going to be helpful now if we don't know where it's at. Toggle shell borders. There it is. Okay, so Shift and click in my UV window here. For whatever reason now I get a different subset. So I toggle the shell borders, which now on the model we can see this really dark defined line around the hat where we've cut, and we can also see this other line as I go back to edge mode. Right, you can see this darkened line here that goes around the head, and that's exactly where this line down the side is. So that tells us, and you can see the sawtooth right here, right? So that tells us exactly how this thing was cut initially, and we'll get back to that in a minute. I just wanted to point that out because I don't think for our final unwrap we're going to want that particular line there, and there's some other cutting right here that we can see that we're not going to want in there. So I'm going to continue to work on the hat, and actually for the purposes of this I'm going to go back to my model and my modeling toolkit. I'm going to turn off symmetry because we're going to be very specific about what we're selecting, and we may not want the same thing selected on both sides. I'm going to go up the back here. I'm started where my hat line is, and I'm just going to go up the back. And then let me spin around and get a good feel for where I'm at. All right, up the back, and then I'm going to go kind of around in a circular pattern, almost right up here at the very top of the hat. And this won't change anything. This won't give us a new shell, but this will give new cuts along this particular hat. And so as we'll see it unwrap soon, it's gonna unfold a little bit nicer. So I'm gonna go ahead and say shift click and then cut UVs. So now we've got that done, and I'm going to go back in and I'm actually going to undo the sawtooth on the top here. Right? We've decided we don't want that particular cut. We just want to cut it up the middle like we've done. So this top piece will be one circular pelt, if you will, when we go to put it back into place. Whoops. Started undoing my own stuff. Okay, so I've undone the sawtooth there. I'm going to undo this other cut down the back so we have a more deliberate line on the hat. Now watch what this does. Okay. This may be dangerous doing all of these together, but I'm going to shift right click and sew these UVs together, and look at all the weird tearing that just happened here. It just kind of wrapped itself around. Finally, I'm going to clean these up. I'm grabbing the dark borders that I don't want to be borders in my UV. I don't know why that's torn there, but I'm going to shift click, sew those UVs together. And now my hat should be very defined. All right, I've got a cut up the side and then a half circle around here. One more thing I might do is I think I'm going to take the underside of this hat and I'm going to cut that out, because if you can imagine a flattened map folding over the top of the bill of the hat and the bottom, I'm just going to give this some distortion. Also, if you'll think of most baseball caps, this part underneath is already sometimes different colors or different materials. So that's something that in real life we haven't solved a way to wrap that very nicely with a material. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to grab this edge here. Let me double check and make sure it goes all the way down. Okay. Looks good. And I'm going to cut that one as well. So shift, cut UVs. And there's my new line. Now watch this as I go over here to UV and UV shell. This is a brand new shell, just the underside of the hat, so that will sit separately. The hat is its own UV, and then of course everything else. Just to preview what we've been doing, we don't have to do this, but it kind of gives us an idea of what's happened. I'm going to go in here to my UV. Actually, let me just select it. Select it either from the model itself or from the UV panel. Select everything. And then I'm going to go to my UV menu here. And I'm going to say I want this normalized. And normalize collectively. We'll just leave all that there. Apply and close. Not what I was looking for. I'm sure that was nice. I think what I wanted to do was layout first. Unfold first. That's what I want to do. So I'm going to unfold. I'm going to use the unfold 3D. I think I'm just going to leave everything the way it is. I have set this map size to 1024. I'm going to use a slightly larger texture map than we use on the body, just so we can get some more detail in it. And you know, most engines can handle a whole lot more than our tiny little engines of days gone by. And then this room space of 8 pixels, I'm going to go ahead and jump that up to 10, which appears to be the max, and that will give us plenty of buffer around the sides and the edges for our UV. And apply and close. And now as we go in here, you can see this part right here is our hat. There's the front of it, there's the top part, and here along is where we cut along the back to give it that pelt. Here's the bottom of the hat, and then of course everything else is still right here in that kind of weird face. And so we'll go start working on the face. So I'm going to go to Edges, and I'm going to undo this line here. We'll sew that together, which will look ugly until it doesn't. We'll keep the sawtooth on the bottom, but I don't want it cut behind the ear. I'm probably going to want to cut that back up the side, like we do, up the very back, like we did with the hat. Right, Shift, right click, sew those UVs, and watch what happens. It tried to reattach those, and so it got really weird there. I'm wondering about this one that it didn't attach. What is this? I don't see that as a hard line, but it's hanging out over there by itself. All right. Well, what I'm going to do first, or next, is I'm gonna grab the hair, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that out into its own shell as well. So I'm going up over the ear. All the way up to the brim of the hat. You can kind of see where we defined a little bit of a sideburn and a hairline. I'm using that double click to get the full line, but here, look, I got more than I wanted, and so I'm going to undo that. Just click those out. And if you can see the orange versus the blue, it looks like I got everything that I've defined as hair. Shift, right click, cut UVs. And that'll allow us to paint very nicely up to those edges when we go back later, without having to guess where the hairline could be. We could have left this together and just kind of drawn any pattern we wanted. So that was an option, but we didn't choose it. And then I'm going to, so there's the line down the back. I'm going to take this line here, down, and then one over, but I don't want to cut all the way around, because then we would separate this triangle. But I'm just going to do this one here, and I'm going to cut there. And so now the back of our head should unfold pretty nicely along the back. And just to see what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and unfold again. Same settings, which doesn't do any good because I didn't have it selected. Select everything, unfold. Now you can see we've got that line that looks like it's probably down the middle here. And then this separate shell right here is where we defined our hair. The only thing I'm going to want to do now is I think I'm going to cut the nose and the eyes out and maybe the mustache, and then we'll reposition these. All right. A nice double click around each eye gave me exactly those lines with nothing extra. So I'm going to cut there. which means that that geometry is going to really define where that eye starts. We don't get to paint and fudge that. But that's okay because we already added the hardened edges there to say we really wanted that defined. Okay, now I'm going to, my mouse is being a little weird. Slide this over a bit. I'm going to attempt to cut around the nose. I'll grab that line. We don't have to go right up to the face. There's not going to be a lot of detail on this nose. Alright, so I've got a complete line around the nose to cut it off into its own shell, and then while I'm at it, oops, it looks like I had an extra line selected there, so I'm starting over. Alright, that, the two top lines, and then I'm going to come up the bottom of the nose just a bit with a cut so that it kind of unfolds. That's probably far enough. Cut those UVs, and now we can see that defined line. So now the nose is its own UV shell. The eyes are their own UV shell. The head looks good. I think the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut around that mustache. Which it looks like I was able to do with just a nice double click. So I got all the way around. I'm going to zoom in, and just to double check, I'm going to do a quick render. I think that's the line that I had already defined. Yeah, it looks like it. As the edges of our mustache. I'll cut those UVs. Now I've got that there. All right. I think that's good. So I hit F. Nope. Get crazy. Get on object mode, then hit F to focus. Could probably do it. I've got the whole object selected. Let's unfold this. Same settings. Select the UV first. Sure enough, whatever you want, Maya. Okay, I've selected all the UVs. Okay, we unfolded, and now we can see here's our hat, there's the brim, there's our nose unfolded. The mustache is separate, the eyes are separate. Everything is good, but we've got a lot of dead space here. And so I'm going to keep using tools to get this right. We don't want any overlapping, so I'm using the layout. No prescale. If anything's reversed, we want it flipped. Here's the key right here: is our scale mode is uniform, so that nothing's going to get stretched out too bad. Let me just set scale mode to none, and we'll see what that looks like, and then we'll do it again. Spacing presets for a 1024 map. We want the full square. I'll hit layout UVs. Why didn't that do anything for me? Try it again. Everything should be selected. I'm going to do what I actually want to do and use uniform. I guess it's already laid out. Interestingly. Let's try and normalize that. Maybe that's what I need to do first. So normalize is going to take, it's going to take everything we've done, and it's going to make sure that there's no distortion in it. So if there's anything that needs to be fixed, then it's going to do that. See, it kind of pulled everything around, gave us plenty of room. It looks like we have some weird shapes on the hair itself going over this ear, which we'll look into. Now that I've normalized, I'm going to try and lay out again. Okay, I guess that's fine. Anyway, this is a fairly good layout that we've been given. We're going to want to group things and keep them separate in a lot of cases that we don't want to overlap. And so, that's what's going on. So it looks like somewhere we didn't cut properly and our hair is not a full shell. Make sure I'm on UV shell. So I can select that hat, and that's one thing. The hair didn't get fully cut. So that's why it's hanging out real close there. Let me go back into edge mode and we'll start to see what happened. It's the wrong side. Ah, look, there it is. I'll grab this and hit F to zoom in, come back out a little bit. So we've got this cut coming around here and then it jumped over. So I'm going to take this particular edge. I'm going to sew that back. Grab the edge that I actually want that completes the cut. Shift, right click, and then I'm going to say cut. Now we should have a whole new outlook on everything. Double check that. Yes, my hair is indeed its own shell now. Grab everything and back through the list. So we want to lay it out. We want to unfold it first, probably. Layouts. Spread it just a bit. You can see the hair is a separate thing. Let me go ahead and normalize again just to see if it changes anything. Yeah, so normalize kind of stretches it out and make sure we have plenty of room. This looks like a good unwrap, but we do have some pieces that are a little close together. So let me try layout again. We're laying out for a 1024 map, but I think I'm going to want more space. Let's say just a full 1% space. Let's see if that does anything different. There we go. Look at that. And so I gave it that higher number by a factor of 10, I believe, and you can see we've got a whole lot more space between each individual piece. One thing we can do is start to move things around to where they make sense, right? Like so, like we can keep our eyes. Hold Shift. We can keep our eyes together. I'm going to say Tweak UV tool. I'm going to pull this. Whoa. Command Z, Command Z. All right. There we go. I don't know what happened. I had to click around before it would let me just move the one eye. We'll move these down here. No, let's move them up here. No, down here. We just want to keep them together and probably as on the same level as we can. Just kind of spitballing. The mustache could go almost anywhere. What I'd like to do is move my nose up closer to the head. I'm gonna do something goofy on purpose. So look, I'm gonna overlap it with the brim. Well, it didn't happen that time. I've had other times where when I was tweaking the UV, and if I had overlap, it would automatically just kick it back to where it came from. All right, I want to make sure I've still got plenty of spacing, but since the nose and the face are really going to be the same color, it just makes it easier to keep them up in the same area. This guy's off by himself instead of close to this hat, which is fine. Maybe we'll use a different color. Hair's by itself, mustache, and the eyes. This is a good unwrap. This is very deliberate. This will make life a lot easier when we go to paint. So I'm going to go to Polygons, UV Snapshot. Now UV, here's our head unwrap. 1, so we know what that is. I'm going to do a 1024 map. I believe by default we get set to white in here, but I'm going to use black for this particular map. I do want this as a PNG. That's great. Anti-alias lines. Say OK. So I'll start by going into Finder. Here's my toon guy. Here's my images. Out UV head unwrap 01 should be what we just created. Okay. Since I only had one particular piece of that UV selected, that's all it spit out was the nose, and that's not what we want. We want those guidelines when we go to do our texture. So let me come back into Maya, hit my select, make sure I've got everything, and I'm going to try and that export again. So here's my UV snapshot. All the same settings, yay. Here's our head unwrap 2. Okay. Now as we launch back into Finder, you can see Unwrap 1 had the nose. Unwrap 2's got everything. So I'm going to right click that. I'm going to open that with Photoshop. And I will be back in a second. I'm not going to make you sit through the texturing process in Photoshop, but I'm going to make something up real quick. You know what? Scratch that. Let's go ahead and do some coloring. We've got time. You've got time. You're not going anywhere. Good. I don't have any plans either. All right, so I'm going to duplicate this layer. Master UV. Turn that one off real quick. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to start grabbing pieces and moving them to their own layers. So I'm going to grab the eyes. Layer via cut, and we'll call this layer something really original like eyes. I'm going to zoom in a bit, go to 200%, not 2000, just 200. Move this mustache onto its own layer, layer via cut. Gotta be back on layer 0. Mustache. By holding down Shift, I can add to my selection box, hopefully without selecting anything else. Alright, so yeah, cut under hat out, so now I don't have to worry about that selection here. On layer 0, I can say again, layer via cut, hair. I'll go ahead and just turn these off as I grab them. Alright, so now all I really need to do is separate the hat from the rest of the things, which will be skin. In this case, I'm going to get goofy. I'm going to select everything that's outside these lines. And I'm going to add to this selection. Maybe we should do a class on Photoshop in general. Alright. Looks like I've deselected almost everything. Just the tip here was lit up. Okay, so now I have the skin and everything around the hat. So if I say layer via cut here, then layer 0 should be skin. Oh, excuse me, the new layer should be skin. Yep. And what we're left with is hat. Now it looks like we got some remnants here in hat. So I'm going to cut that layer. I'm going to add it back to skin. Merge them back down. All right. Okay, now that those are each on their own layer, we should be able to color them nicely and bring that texture back into Maya. Okay, really quickly, I grabbed each of the elements that were in our UV layers in Photoshop here, and I just kind of colored them out. I'm going to turn this master layer back on. You can see where we're at. I did overpaint quite a bit by about 5 pixels usually on each of these to make sure that we didn't have anything bleeding over. So I chose a brown for the hair, black for the mustache, kind of a darker red for the under of the hat. I've got a skin tone here, which we'll probably have to play with, and we can definitely add some texture too. Then the red hat, and I went ahead and added a little detail to the hat. And then of course I've got a few layers of eyes here. And so we've kept this master UV on to see just where everything's at and what it's doing. But this is the image we're going to want to output from Photoshop, and I've already done that. I've saved this as a PSD, which retains all our layers, and we can come back in and change colors up if we want to. So that's been done. And then I also went ahead and saved it as a PNG, which is what we want to use back in Maya. And I just overwrote the original layered that we got from Maya's UV thing. So I'm going to save that. We're going to replace it. All right, and we should have a nice texture to put on our head. So I'm going to go back into Maya. Go into object mode. With any luck, I'm done with the UV editor, but I'll keep that around just for a little bit. Drag him into the corner. Tell him to shut up. There we go. So I've got my head selected in object mode. I'm going to go back to my attribute editor. Go all the way back down into... Oh, I did not flatten all the history there. Okay, looks like we got Lambert 1 on. So if we try to apply this map to Lambert 1, what's going to happen is every default object that if we make a new sphere, it'll have this particular map on it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Hypershade. Um, rendering editors, hypershade, and I'm going to create a new Lambert for this. Looks like I've already got one in Lambert 3, which may not be being used yet. I'm not sure what the history is behind there. I'll make a new one. Lambert 4 it is. So we're going to take Lambert 4. Over here on the color tab, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the little checkers. We're going to tell it we want a file. And now an image name. Again, here's our file. I'm going to go to the workspace root, images, and that was unwrap2.png. There's the guy. Open that. You can see we've got some weird little representation of our stuff there. And there's multiple ways we can do this. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to middle mouse click and then drag from Lambert 4 onto this head. Boom, there we go. And now we have a painted face. We've got the colored hat. We've got it just a little bit darker underneath. You can see all the lines of the hair. Now that we have that, it's easy to go into Photoshop and really add some details. Put an initial or something on the hat. You can add some stitching around the hat. If we wanted to, we could add little bits of detail, and so you can see the individual follicles of hair. We could really add even more shine to the eyes. There's a lot we can do. We could add pores to the skin if we wanted. But this is a real simple way, and this is why we called this guy Toon Guy. We want to see just a real simple cartoon way to create ourselves a character. So back here in Maya, I can already tell that I might want those eyes to be a little bit smaller. His pupils look like he's just come in out of a very dark room. I think I'm done with that. I think I'm done with the UV editor. Now let's preview this. Select this guy. Now you can see on our UV editor where everything lives, where everything sits. So that's fun. I'll show you one more way to mess this up. Why would I do this? I don't know. So I can grab, you know what, before I do this, I'm going to save. Just File, I'm going to increment and save. Great. But I want to show just one last thing we can do with the UV editor. And let's say I wanted to move those eyes, which it really wouldn't do me any good because I don't have any whites outside of them. But I can go to my guy and say UV shell. Let me grab this shell. And if I try to move that using Shift, click, and tweak UV, I want to move that eye. So I've moved that representation of where that eye, where that geometry is picking up its textures from our PNG texture file. Right, you can see as I move this around, we can make that eye red. We can make it got a mustache going through his eye, brown hair in his eye, whatever, right? So there are some things we can do even after the fact to our UVs to move them around and edit them. That's really just horrible. I'm going to try and get that. I'm going to Command Z. I'm going to undo that. But one final little highlight of the power of the UV editor. Object mode. Display. Show me everything we've got in this scene. And here's our Toon Guy. Texturing and geometry may be different, but that's what we've been working on. And we will soon unite him with another character that we're going to build and create some scenes. But for now, we have a fully textured, fully rigged, fully modeled, fully ready to go cartoon character in Maya. See you next time.